Lecture 5 Macroeconomics for an Open Economy. In this lecture, we will introduce the open economy. So, first of all, in order to understand the activity for the open economy, you will look at the balance of payments. The balance of payments is the summary for all international activity between one country and the rest of the world. Second, we will go to explain how is exchange rate determined. And lastly, explain the changes in exchange rate depending on different mechanisms. So now we go to part 1 to introduce balance of payments. The balance of payments, for example, in this table, is the summary of all international activity between one economy and the rest of the world. And when you have any transaction between one economy and the rest of the world, the transaction may be accounted following this method. If the transaction involves the inflow of payments, so it won't be called inflow, and we won't record it with the plus sign in the table. And if the transaction involves the outflow payments, so we won't record it with the minus sign in the table. So that is why you won't see that there are different sides in this table. Sometimes it's positive and sometimes it's negative. If any item has a positive value, so it means that the inflow of payment is higher than the outflow of payment for this item. But if this item has the negative side, so it means that the inflow of payment for this item is lower than the outflow of payment for this item. After you understand the accounting method for a transaction, you will go to introduce the structure of BOP, or the balance of payments. There are two main accounts in the balance of payments: the current account and the capital account. The current account measures the flow of payment between one country with another country for currently produced goods and services. And the capital account measures the flows of payment between countries for financial assets such as stock, bonds, and real estate. And after having the result for the two accounts, we will go to the overall result for BOP. It is called official transactions account. And so it records the total amount of foreign currency that the nations buy or sell. So now for these three important accounts, we highlight it with the yellow round in this table. The first account, current account, has four main items, and all these items related to the transaction of goods and services or income. And finally, net transfer refer to the gift, present, or the support between countries. Capital account has three main items, and all these items related to assets or real estate. or it is investment. And we have three types of investment: net foreign direct investment, portfolio investment, and other investment, for example, borrowing money. The third item is the sum of the first two items. The third account is the sum of the first two accounts. So the result for each account is called balance. The balance. For the first account current account balance, we will have the result for the current account balance is the sum of all the sub-account balance. For example, in 2008, the balance for current account is minus $10,800 US. It is the sum of 1, 2, 3, and 4 net value or the sub-account. Second, the capital account balance is also be the sum of the 3 sub-account balances, 1, 2, and 3. And so we have the result for capital account is positive $12,300 US. The sum of two balances minus 10,000 plus positive 12,000 will be the result for balance payment, OTA, and it will be positive because the positive for capital account is higher than the negative in current account. All this value is called the surplus or deficit. If the value or the balance is positive, we will say that this is the surplus of balance payment. Or if there is the negative, we will say that this is the deficit of balance payment. So now if you look again into this example, we will see that in the year 2008, we have deficit in current account and we have surplus in capital account. And finally, the balance of payments has a surplus. But for other years, for example, 2011 like this, we have surplus in all the item or in all the account, both the current account and the capital account. So finally, balance of payments also has a surplus. Now we have the practice. Slide number 14 show you some question to practice. How does each of the following transactions influence the balance of payment, and especially each item, each account, the current account and the capital account? After we introduce the balance of payments, we can see that the balance of payments record on the transaction or on values of international activity. And there is a fact that international activities always require foreign currency. For example, when Vietnamese people want to buy goods or services from US, so we need the US currency is the US dollar. And so we need to exchange for the currency. The exchange for the currency is called foreign exchange. And now we will go to the next section to explain about the foreign exchange or exchange rate. Exchange rate is the rate to exchange currency when we exchange currency for the payments. There are two typical definitions for exchange rate. The first definition related to nominal exchange rate. The nominal exchange rate is the price of foreign currency in terms of domestic currency, or in some country, they have the different nominal exchange rate definition. Is that nominal exchange rate tells us the price of domestic currency in terms of foreign currency. So the two terms for exchange rate is the reciprocal. So here are some examples for nominal exchange rate in Vietnam, and you may have the updated data from searching the fact. The next term for exchange rate is the real exchange rate. When we have nominal exchange rate is the price of currency, but the real exchange rate shows the relative price between goods and services, and it tells us which goods or services are more competitive in terms of price. So, for example, when we look at the nominal exchange rate, 1 US dollar equal 23,000 Vietnam dong. This is in terms of currency. But for the real exchange rate, we do not have the similar rate. It means that we can never exchange 1 US good for 23,000 Vietnam good. Okay? So, in fact, the real exchange rate between US and Vietnam may be 1 US car equal 1/2 Vietnamese car, or 1 US t-shirt equal 2 Vietnamese t-shirt. So we can see that if 1 US t-shirt equal 2 Vietnamese t-shirt, so Vietnamese t-shirt is cheaper, or in other words, is more competitive in terms of price. And Vietnam may export t-shirt to US. And if the real exchange rate is 1 US car equal 1/2 Vietnam car, so Vietnam car is more expensive, and we will import car from US. So the real exchange rate finally measure ratio of unit of goods and services, and then it will show us the competitiveness between countries. from this importance of exchange rate, we will go to explain how to determine the exchange rate. There are three typical theories to determine exchange rate. The first theory to determine exchange rate is the purchasing power parity theory. According to the purchasing power parity, or we will call it PPP theory, the real exchange rate will equal 1, or this is called the law of one price. So if the real exchange rate equal 1, and it means that there is purchasing power parity between the two countries. So 1 unit of good in this country equal 1 unit of good in other country. So we will have the nominal exchange rate, the real exchange rate equal 1. So nominal exchange rate will be the ratio between domestic price and foreign price. So this is the first way to determine nominal exchange rate. The relative purchasing power parity shows us the changes in the exchange rate. Percentage change in exchange rate equal to the percentage change in domestic price minus percentage change in foreign price. The percentage change in exchange rate is also be the depreciation rate of domestic currency. It will be the difference between inflation, domestic inflation, and foreign inflation, because the percentage change in the price is also be the inflation rate. There is a very interesting case study from the textbook, Hamburger Standard. So please read carefully the case study in the textbook to see how do we determine exchange rate using this theory, the PPP theory. The second theory to determine exchange rate is the uncovered interest parity condition, or UIP theory. This theory says that the expected rate of depreciation of the domestic currency equal to the difference between interest rate between the two countries. So we can look at this formula to understand this theory. The depreciation in nominal exchange rate equal to the difference between interest rate between domestic and foreign country. So, for example, the interest rate in Vietnam is 7%. The interest rate in US is 1%. And if this condition is held, it means that saving in Vietnam and US bring us the same rate of return, or the interest parity. So we will have that the depreciation of Vietnam dong will be 6% at the end of the year. Slide number 29 and 30 are the example for you to practice. Lastly, the third theory to determine exchange rate is the supply-demand approach. We won't use the supply and demand in the foreign exchange market to determine the changes in the exchange rate. The two basic forces in the markets are supply and demand. Firstly, we examine the supply of foreign currency. The supply of foreign currency comes from foreigners when they buy goods and services in this country. So if the price or the price of foreign currency increase, domestic goods become cheaper and we will sell more goods and services to foreigners. So the supply of foreign currency increase. So finally, we can see that if exchange rate increase, the supply of foreign currency also increase, and the supply curve will be upward sloping. Another force is the demand. If the exchange rate increase, it also means that the price for foreign currency increase, so foreign goods and services become more expensive, and it will reduce the demand for foreign goods by domestic residents. Domestic residents don't want to buy foreign currency anymore, so the demand curve for foreign currency reduces when the exchange rate increase. It means that the demand curve is downward sloping. So finally, we have the supply and demand for foreign currency in exchange for domestic currency. In this diagram, we show the quantity of US dollar in exchange for Vietnam dong, and in vertical axis, we show the exchange rate. It means that the rate to exchange Vietnam dong and US dollar, and it also means the price of US dollar in terms of Vietnam dong. Supply of US dollar comes from all the activity related to exchange from US dollar to Vietnam dong, and demand for US dollar comes from all activity exchange from Vietnam dong to US dollar. For example, when you go to US, you need to exchange from Vietnam dong to US dollar. So it will increase or it will affect the demand for US dollar. Another example may be when Apple opened a factory in Vietnam. So they won't bring US dollar into Vietnam and they have to exchange from US dollar into Vietnam dong to invest in Vietnam, to build the factory in Vietnam. So the interaction between supply and demand for US dollar will bring us the equilibrium and determine exchange rate. Slide number 36 is the practice for this section. Explain how does the following transaction influence the supply and demand in the foreign exchange market. So now, from the three theory, the first theory is the PPP theory, purchasing power parity. Second is the uncovered interest parity. And third, supply and demand theory. We have the fundamental factors that determine exchange rate. The first factor is the changes in a country's income. Second is the changes in the country prices. Third is the changes in the interest rate. The first three factors related to PPP and UIP theory. 4. The changes in risk perception with respect to currency. And the last one, changes in trade policy. The last two factors related to supply and demand theory. But in fact, when we have these changes in the economy, it is not necessarily lead to the change in exchange rate, because there is the exchange rate mechanism, and sometimes exchange rate will be fixed by the central bank, not changed freely in the markets. So there are three typical mechanisms for exchange rate. The first mechanism is the flexible exchange rate. Second is the fixed exchange rate. And third, partially flexible exchange rate mechanism. Under the first mechanism, flexible exchange rate, the exchange rate is freely changed or freely determined with the supply and demand in the market, and there's no intervention by the central bank. So if you look at this diagram, you will see that the changes in, for example, supply of US dollar lead to the supply increase and shift to the right, and we have the new equilibrium here. So exchange rate will reduce and lower than E0. These changes in exchange rate is called flexible exchange rate. The second mechanism for exchange rate is the fixed exchange rate mechanism. And now the central bank can fix exchange rate by intervention, buying or selling foreign currency to maintain the equilibrium of the market at the fixed exchange rate. So now we can look at the two typical interventions by the central bank. Firstly, the exchange rate is now 22,500 Vietnam dong for 1 US dollar. So if there is a change for any reason, demand for US dollar increase, and it may lead to the change or the increase in exchange rate up to 24,000. So how the central bank intervene in this case? In order to maintain the initial exchange rate 22,500, the central bank must sell foreign currency to fill into this distance, because there is this distance shows the shortage of US dollar in the markets. And the sale of foreign currency, the sale of US dollar, increase the supply of US dollar. And finally, we have the equilibrium at B. So now at point B, we have maintained the initial exchange rate. The result for this policy is related to foreign reserve of central bank. It related to the trade balance and also related to the amount of money base in the economy. In the opposite case, when exchange rate is 22,500 Vietnam dong for $1, and if for any reason supply of US dollar increase and shift to the right, and it may lead to the reduction in exchange rate to, for example, 22,000. So the difference or the distance between A and B show the surplus of US dollar in the market. And now the central bank should buy these or purchase this surplus of US dollar, and so increase the demand for US dollar. And finally, we have the new equilibrium at point B, and the exchange rate is now maintained to the initial level. So now you can see that there are different ways to explain exchange rate. The exchange rate may be changes depends on the three theory, or it may be fixed by the government or by the central bank. So now please have more practice in exercise and in the slide. This is the end for lecture 5, Open Economy.